Hi everyone, welcome back to the June edition of Loop Live. My name's Josh Gallagher and I'm really pleased to be back to unpack the now and next in media and marketing. We're doing something a little bit different today. After almost 2 years of just virtual sessions, we are hybrid. We're conferencing at the moment as part of a physical get-together of about 40 of our leaders on the Coca-Cola business. So bear with us, we're gonna have a live panel or a mix of a live and hybrid panel today. But last time we spoke to you, we spoke about attention and paying for quality time. On the ground, we've been experiencing increasing fragmentation of the media landscape. When we talk about attention measures, this has meant way more metrics. The aim is for us to actually consolidate those metrics so that we have the potential to bridge the gap between strategy and tactics, assist with media choices across platforms, measure media and message together, and help with identifying the contextual fit in a soon-to-be cookieless world. But that was last time we were together. Today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different. I'm super proud about this topic. I'm going to take a big step back today because it's probably not the one that I'm an expert on or should be talking about in the most way, but we're going to talk about something that we need to address in the way that we do our planning, and that's being more inclusive. We've got a really big issue. Our paid media practices have yet to really match the areas that influence our society the most. Culture really is shaped by media, but why do we have equal representation for our females in media targeting, but not in the paid content created by real people? In some categories like travel, even health and fitness and automotive, female voices account for only 20% of the content, despite category buyers being around 50%. So as I said, I'm not an expert here, but we're lucky enough to have some people join the session today, people that are, but also people that care enough to make the change. The first person that you're going to see a lot of is Joyce from our regional team. She's a content strategist from the region and is going to ground us in the reality of the topic, but also lead the discussion. She's going to be joined by Arthur, who's our resident influencer expert, and Claire from the UK, who leads thinking globally around inclusive planning. Then there's going to be a discussion with a diverse panel of people from our region that not only bring their subject matter expertise, but perspectives from markets across the region, because we know that it's really different. I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments and questions. Place them in the comment section and hopefully we'll get time to cover them off. But I think that there's going to be a lot of great discussion anyway. So let's set the scene on inclusive influence so that we're all in the loop with our context video.
Representation in media shapes the way we see ourselves, particularly on social media, where influence is significant. But 79% of women do not feel represented. Stereotypes and bias still exist in many categories: automotive, finance, travel, even in health and fitness. Less than 20% of content features a female. Inclusive planning is needed now, so all voices are represented. Getting it right returns more value for brands. 90% chance of improved brand lift. 59% preference for brands. 64% positive action in purchases. 3 key pillars help define and guide the inclusive planning process. Work from insights, not stereotypes. Diversify producers, partners, and publishers. Measure intent and impact.
Amazing. I think we're live.
Yes, I think we do.
This is the second time Arthur and I are partnering up for Loop Live for all enthusiasts of Loop Live. It's a very interesting and special way in which we're doing this, as Josh has said. I think before we begin formally the topic, we just wanted to share a bit of why this topic really matters to us and some of the personal observations that we've seen. If you're like me and you've been constantly on TikTok a lot, looking at creative videos, for example, one of the things that I've noticed in the last, I want to say 3 to 6 months, is that I've been personally really engaged with creators and influencers who have been very vulnerable in talking about topics such as mental wellness, sexuality, identity. And the reason why, it is particularly engaging to go through the kind of content that they put out is because it's raw, it's real, it's vulnerable, it's diverse in the way that, I understand the world, and it is inclusive. Influencers reflect society and the people around us. They reflect who we are ourselves, but also they give us a window into knowing the world out there and the multiple diverse perspectives and opinion. And that's why we find influencers particularly powerful as a means to communicate by brands.
Absolutely. And yeah, thanks for having me. It's influencers, as you mentioned, Joyce, are one of the main reasons brands decide to work with influencers is about the authenticity that those people can bring throughout the content, but also and most importantly throughout who they are. And I've been fortunate to work in Europe and then in APAC, and we've been hearing about diversity and inclusion for many years now, and we've seen how this very interesting and important topic has evolved, and how brands and agencies and everyone pretty much in the advertising space is embracing this specific issue. And I think a lot of progress has been made, but what I realized when we're working on this piece and the white paper and the document is actually so much still need to be done. And on a personal level, I realized that even though this is a very topic I'm very much invested in, there's still a lot I can do to kind of like challenge my teams, challenge my colleagues, and also, of course, having those conversations with clients. So I hope you guys are going to enjoy the next couple of slides and some of the learnings and some of the insight that we'll be walking you through.
Amazing. So the reality is, like what Arthur had said, 79% of women in APAC today do not feel represented by the ads that they're seeing. Sometimes it feels like it's a no wonder. I feel for maybe 50% of the women in this room today, you might have seen an ad where you're like, I don't understand why they're portraying women this way. I don't relate to any of these communications. And that is a really significant problem as we think about building relevance as a brand. At the same time, we're seeing that particularly in influencer categories, as what Josh had alluded to, and gave a sneak peek of, less than 20% of influencer content are coming from female voices in categories such as fitness, in gaming, in automotive, in finance, in banking. And that's, again, a very startling statistic. Only 21% of APAC marketers in a quick straw poll that we did with some of our brands and our clients said that they felt that their current influencer strategy was very inclusive. 64% of these same marketers felt that they don't feel super confident in being able to deliver an inclusive planning campaign. So today, what we are trying to share with you in the audiences on the live stream as well as in real life is a little bit of a perspective. Sorry, just going to move myself on what are some practical ways in which we can actually overcome some of the challenges that we saw about and we just spoke to you about. But also, I think before that, why this is so important for us to start to think inclusive in the way that we plan, particularly in influencer strategies. So why does inclusivity matter? I think at the heart, if we think about ourselves as just audiences, as consumers consuming media, a lot of what we see on media is very critical or key in guiding the way that we think about ourselves as individuals, but also the way that we see how the world sees people like us. One of the big things is that media has such a strong ability to influence the potential and the aspirations of people young and old, male, female, of different sexuality and identities. And that's really what we are trying to achieve with inclusive influencers and planning. From a business side, because we're all in the business of trying to sell and make our brands profitable, drive business growth, we've seen that inclusivity also helps to drive value for the brand. 90% of we expect that there will be 90% brand lift for brands that are seen or perceived by audiences that are more inclusive. There's a 59% uplift in preference for these same brands and a 64% improvement in how audiences or consumers would prefer to take a positive action towards the brand. So being inclusive obviously not only creates societal and social change among individuals as well as different communities, especially the ones that are currently underrepresented, but it also presents an opportunity for brands to find a new way to grow and to create personal relevance to their audiences. Now, there are three key things that we want to focus on when we think about how we can be inclusive, especially when it comes to media and planning. The first is about how we work from insights and not stereotype. And we'll chat a little bit more in the case study, which Claire will bring us in just about a minute. But it's really about challenging some of the biases that today we have. We may not even recognize them, and it's important for us to always go back to the data, go back to the experts, to be able to understand if there are certain things that we think are the way that communities operate, and rewrite and unlearn some of these stereotypes and associations. The second is about diversifying our producers, partners, and publishers. This is extremely critical. One of the things that we feel very strongly about, especially in the media agency, is how is it that we can use media dollars really to directly impact some of the publishers, the partners that we work with that belong to some of these underrepresented communities that we want to represent as a brand. Last, make sure that we are measuring not just the impact, but also the intent. Some of the challenges, of course, with inclusive planning would include things like you may not necessarily see immediate outcomes, but it is important to make sure that we're always tracking and trending towards a goal that we set as a brand and as an organization. So I would love to invite Claire now onto the virtual stage to talk a little bit more about our amazing case study coming from the UK. Claire, please.
Great, thank you, Joyce. So this Adidas campaign is a really lovely piece of work created by our UK team. So a shout out to John Beardsworth and Hannah Kilminster who led on this work. So with Euro 2020 approaching, the challenge that Adidas were committed to is really championing football for everyone. So Adidas wanted to connect to all of their audiences through the love of football. I think the reality is when we think about football and the environments where football are played and celebrated, they do not feel safe to many people with marginalised identities. So to really explore this, the team conducted some bespoke research for this campaign. And within that research, they revealed that 67% of LGBTQ plus women of colour felt unsafe within football contexts. And 71% of people with marginalised identities felt international football could be made much more accessible. So women, and particularly women with intersectional identities, including their ethnicity, their sexuality, their gender identity, felt particularly unwelcome and unsafe in football environments. So next slide, if you're able to go to that. So this insight gave Adidas a really clear strategy for driving inclusion within their campaign. And this was about creating both physical and online safe spaces where all people feel they can belong within the football community. And as part of this execution, the team created a physical event that was a designated safe space for watching what was played in 2021 in the Euros quarterfinal match. So there was zero tolerance for discrimination and all attendees signed a code of conduct. And as you can see here, there was behavioural nudges on all of the tables to remind people of the behaviour that is expected in that safe space. So the team amplified the initiative through a media partnership with Copper90 and Versus. And this was really about telling the stories of the Adidas Football Collective, which are 7 grassroots football teams. And these football teams really centre marginalised identities, such as Stonewall FC, which is an LGBTQ grassroots football club, and Goals for Girls, which particularly focuses on young women aged 11 to 16. So, next slide. And as you can see, when you centre authentic representation within your campaign, it has a really powerful impact. So with strong increases in both brand index and brand reputation scores. We've got the full case study and media partnership written up into a case study deck with all the creative assets. So if anyone wants to see more, do drop me a note. It's Claire McAlpine at MediaCom.com. And yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about it.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Claire. The beauty of this case study really comes from the fact that such a strong and powerful insight about how certain community members do not feel always very welcome or safe in what you imagined a very universal and diverse sporting event really then catalyze the way in which we think about how we can create just better experiences for everyone in a fairly, I would say, universal sport such as football. So what are some of the immediate opportunities that we're seeing specifically in the domain of influencers? We spoke about the fact that today the category voices or the voices of the influencers in specific categories are not always fully represented. And it creates a huge problem because when you don't see individuals like you speaking to individuals like you, the question then becomes, do you think that the brand is really interested in speaking with you? And we'll let Arthur talk about this.
So I think this example is another one, maybe with your first perception of football. But before I carry on this slide, I just want to ask everyone to kind of like close your eyes. And when I say business, finance, and banking, what is the first picture that you see in your mind? And I'm pretty much the same, and I'm biased as well. And the first thing I will see is like probably a gentleman in a suit. And obviously that's cultured because of, our history about, the legacy of what we've been exposed to. So be in the media, so be in ads, or so be in movies as well. But actually, that's not true versus the reality. So how we are picturing business, finance, and banking industry, it doesn't have to be a man in a suit. Actually, when you look a bit closer to the data, and that's an exercise we did in APAC, is around, okay, who is purchasing banking and financial product, or who is a decision maker when there is a purchase and in a household? And actually, over 48% of them are females. The second aspect is around, my eyes are getting closer, who is following this specific topic, banking and finance on social media. And actually, we see that over 40% of women, part of the survey, are also following this specific topic. And probably this trend has been accelerated over the last 2-3 years, where finance has been a bit more accessible to everyone. However, we cannot compare this data with our database of influencers that we have across APAC. And I agree that the numbers will vary market per market, but what we notice is on average, there is only a small percentage of influencers, female influencers, specialize in topic like business and finance. So that's where we see a huge delta between who is interested in this topic, who is buying those services and product, versus who is talking about it. So that's obviously there is a gap on, how can we do and what can we do, not only to encourage those 6% female influencers and content creators to be more visible and more on the plans, but also in a different aspect is what can we do to significantly increase this percentage of 6%. So here we can see a few other examples around some of the bias that we will have, or maybe some categories that we will associate unconsciously or maybe consciously sometimes through a specific gender. When I think I can ask you the same question about automotive, or I can ask you the same question about gaming, automatically what you will see is more like maybe skewed towards male audiences. And the data here is priced to the same rationale about who is purchasing product, or who is a decision maker in this specific category, who is following this specific topic on social media, and obviously who is purchasing this product. You will see on top right, health and fitness. And we were actually debating about that number sounds a bit weird, because you would imagine that it's kind of like well balanced. I mean, if you are on Instagram or maybe a bit younger than me and on TikTok, you will see who is talking about health and fitness. And actually the definition of health and fitness is more about proper gym stuff, who is weighting lift and lifting weight and talking about all the supplement that you can take and all that. So I think the lines between beauty, fashion, and health and fitness are a bit blurry, and that's why I think we can see this lower representation of female influencers. However, on the other way around, if I ask the question about a conversation we have with a client in terms of, I want to target parents, and often the first thing is comes like, oh, I want a mom. But actually, not all parents are moms. Not just the moms are deciding what nappy is best for their kids, or what formula milk is best for the kids. But you can see the delta in terms of over-indexing of female influencers in that specific categories. So, we can talk about those data for hours, but I think it's just for us to be conscious of those bias, just so for us about being conscious about there is some work to be done, and making sure that we have this conversation with our clients and our teams when we're working for a client in that specific category.
Awesome. So very quickly, there are a couple of things that we want to take you through in the final 2 to 3 minutes before we go into the panel. And that's how we think about bringing inclusivity and the idea or the way in which we need to think inclusively into the entire planning process. So we've come up with an acronym called RESPECT. There are more details in the white paper, which you can download. But very quickly, it's about how inclusive has a role to play in every aspect, in every process of the communications development or campaign development journey. R is making sure that we are consistent and committed to a cause. We're not here to be tokenistic. We're not here to raise a rainbow flag for one day of the year or 1 month of the year. We want to find a cause and a purpose which is going to be credible for our brand DNA and stick to that across the entire year, across all our campaigns. E is about examining our biases, look to the data, not our stereotypes, to understand the communities and our audiences. S is all about starting with representation. So when we think about the influencer mix or the creator mix that we want to start with, make sure that they are fully representative of the audiences that today you want to target. P is prioritizing DEI scoring, which we will come to in just a bit on the details of what DEI scoring entails. E is about empowering content. So to the point that Arthur made, even with representation, that is only the beginning. What you make your talents or your influencers say is a huge aspect. We don't want to lean into the stereotypes and the cliches that are outdated and irrelevant to our audiences. C is about consulting with community and expert voices. And this is really closely tied with E. It's about how we can leverage and speak and partner with all these individuals who are in these communities that we want to include, and understand what their lived experiences are and look like. And finally, T is to make sure we're always tracking and measuring the intent and impact to ensure that we're able to scale and to succeed.
And just to build on the respect framework, actually, we come up with some sort of scoring system. Once again, is all about making sure that when we work on a plan or when we work with our clients, we go beyond this cliche or stereotype of this should be my audience. When I take the example of parents, let's not just work with mom and work with dads as well, or different type of families as well, who makes a decision on that. So matching the audiences of who is buying your product or services versus who is representing that product. And something I want to add as well, when I say about representation, often what we see is, yes, there are a lot of women represented in ads. And so recently, over the last few years, you will see, or people from different minorities. But actually, what is also important is not just represent them in a traditional way. A mom, often on ads and content, you will see they are either represented in an empathetic mom or in a devoted wife. That's not what we mean by we need to have more women in ads or in content. Is making sure that it's not just the way you present them on screen, but also behind the screen as well. So there are additional metrics in terms of look beyond the data, look beyond the face value of any single influencers that you are working with. It doesn't mean that the influencers is within your target audience, that the people who follow that specific individuals are also within your influencers followers. The additional aspect as well is, as I said, around measurement. Define what good looks like, and be creative in a way that you want to test and learn. Don't stick to your stereotype. I know this has been working really well for me. Yeah, you're fishing in the same pond, but actually there's a much bigger pond that you can go and fish and learn as well. And lastly is around remuneration and compensation. Often in this industry, the influencers or the creator will dictate what's the price if you want to collaborate with them. That might be true for the big and top celebrities, but actually the majority of influencers don't really know how they price themselves, or they might hear something and they will price it. Our job as an agency is making sure that when we have conversation and we do negotiate rates, we compensate the creators fairly and consistently based on the performance they will deliver, and regardless of age, gender, sexuality, or any other minority. It's down to the data, it's down to the performance, and it's down to the creativity that specific influencers will bring on the table.
Great. So just 4 key takeouts before we move on to the next. Why does inclusivity matter? We spoke about how representation is important for individuals and communities to think about how the world sees them and the possibilities that they see for themselves. It also creates positive value for brands. What does it mean to be inclusive in media? It's about making sure that we're always thinking about your audience first, working from insights, not stereotypes, and creating inclusivity in the entire planning process. Some of the opportunities that we immediately spoke about, which we can start to act on, are the ways in which we think about the influences that we engage for the categories that we operate in. Are they truly reflective of the audiences that are actually making daily purchase decisions? And finally, we spoke about the respect framework and specifically on the DEI scoring mechanism. The scoring system is, the recommendation is that it's one part in which we highly, encourage brands to start to think about beyond just the scale or the reach of the influencers and also the engagement. Think about whether or not there can be positive DEI scores that we can create or generate with the ways in which we decide on the final influencers. All right, so now, we will move on to the second part in the last 15 minutes. So the way that we're going to run it is there will be 2 panel discussions, 2 mini ones. The first, we'll have Claire and Arthur speak a little bit more about some of the questions relating to inclusivity and influencers. And I will be very excited after that to also invite 3 of our market representatives from Australia, Japan, as well as the Philippines to join us to share a little bit of perspective about how they are seeing some of these results pan out in their respective local markets. So, Claire, first question for you. It's amazing the work that you're doing in the UK and globally. One of the things that I think, is really weighing heavily on our minds is how is it that, you've seen are the biggest impact on audiences, on brands, on communities as a result of brands being more inclusive in their planning?
Yeah, I love that question. I think it's such an important question to ask with this work. So I think when you're looking at impact, you can look at it from a few different perspectives. So, I mean, as head of inclusive planning, what I'm looking at is sort of end-to-end. Pause whilst the echo happens here. So I'm looking at it from the strategy end to obviously the influencer end and media partnerships, sort of all the way through. And what we're really trying to do is make the work more authentically representative and relevant. So are we driving impact there is a really important question to ask. And then looking at creating social impact beyond the period of the campaign is also really important. And I love the point that Arthur was raising there. So what tangible social impact are we driving? And very importantly, we do work with clients. What is the impact for the client in terms of media, brand, and sales metrics? So I think a really crucial way that we gather authentic insights is through our work with culture consultants, and we work with them to co-create campaign insights and creative ideas. And so our culture consultants are a network of individuals and collectives outside of our agency who guide campaigns, and they speak to communities that we particularly want to reach. And as many of these consultants are founders and CEOs of diverse and new wave partners, they are perfectly placed to help embed influencers that really reflect our audiences within the media partnerships. And I think what I constantly hold when I'm doing this work is actually a phrase from the disability activism community. And it's such a great reminder, and it's nothing about us without us. So nothing about us without us. So how are you involving diverse voices and lived experience of diversity within your campaigns? And it's always useful to look around the room or the Zoom and see if those voices are really represented. Are those people in the room guiding the discussion? And I think when thinking about impact and social impact, think beyond the 4-week period of your campaign. And I think Reebok as a client are another brilliant client who are doing great work in this space. And we've been particularly working with them to identify future creative talent from many diverse communities, and in particular LGBTQ+ communities. And as part of this work, the team created paid internships with Gay Times, which is an LGBTQ publisher. And those paid interns actually worked on the Reebok campaigns. So creating impact by literally setting them up in careers and giving them their first opportunities. And when it comes to commercial metrics, I'm absolutely seeing those as well in terms of impact increased attention metrics, increased brand metrics. And there's a lot of publicly available research from the likes of Ipsos Mori and Kinetic and System 1 that really shows that short-term sales impact is lifted when diversity is authentically represented.
Second question is for you. Second question's for you, Arthur. Sure. Measurement is such an important part of media, of planning, of influencer strategy. How would you recommend brands think about measurement?
I think I just want to build on what Claire was mentioning. Yes, she covered a lot about the performance and the metrics, but from observation, often, we consider influencers around, I want to deliver media metrics about cost per engagement, cost per content, cost per views, and you name it. And I think sometimes we get a bit lost in what else the influencers can bring on the table. It's not just views or reach or engagement. It's about, the unique piece of content. And one of the reasons we're working with influencers, it's not just to borrow their audiences. It's also about the creativity and the authenticity that they bring on the table. And often, sometimes those creativity is not easy to score. It's not like, this creativity will drive X in terms of engagement. So my point is more around move slightly away from purely vanity metrics or performance and traditional metrics. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm saying that they are important, but when you work with influencers, you have to tap into the creativity. There are multiple studies that show that actually pretty much 50% of what people remember in any piece of advertising that they see is the creativity, and that's often what triggers purchase or ad recall. So it's beyond performance, or let's challenge what performance is and what good looks like is metrics, engagement, cost per, and all those things, but also into, are we representing, are we creative, are we kind of like standing out from the crowd, and are we making sure that we have influencers and type of content that are representative for all of the consumers that we have, as diverse as they are. So I think, just to build on what Claire was mentioning, is making sure that we move away from purely performance and think about creativity. I know it's not easy to put a score or to put a hard metric on it, but it definitely has some value.
Amazing. I'm conscious of time, and I'm also looking at some of the comment section. I don't think we have any questions right now, so I would love to also switch over to our local experts to share a little bit more about their local perspective. So if I can invite Eileen and also Wendy and Rach to be on the screen. Eileen literally joins us from the rest of the room that you cannot see. And thank you so much, Claire, for joining us in the previous panel. So just very quickly, we have Rachel, Wendy, as well as Eileen, who come from Australia. Rachel, Wendy in Japan, and Eileen in the Philippines, all expert voices in their respective markets. In the final few minutes, there are a couple of questions that I wanted to chat through, perhaps starting with Wendy first. So this is for all. When we think about some of these results that you just saw, are you surprised? How relevant or how close do you think this is as a reflection of your market? Wendy?
Hi, Joyce, and konnichiwa. Hello, everyone from Tokyo. Very nice to be here. So it is reflective of certain categories in our market. So categories that are still very typically skewed towards males, like automotive, business, finance. Although in Japan, I think there are also other sort of mass categories where females over-index, and where there is a big use of female influencers quite often and unfortunately overtly to attract the male audience. Not great for both parties. And I think it's not just about female representation in this market. It's about how female influencers are being presented. We had a brand that did a really good job with it. SK2 last year with their Change Destiny campaign. They featured, female athletes, including an Olympic swimmer who recovered from leukemia, and went on to compete in the Olympics. I think these are the kind of stories that we want to see, real stories about empowerment, about strength, about overcoming challenges. And I think this is what will move the needle. It's the quality of the representation and not just the quantity.
You feel coming out of Australia?
Yeah, thanks, Wendy, and hi everyone. I'm Rachel here from Australia. I think, yeah, I really hear that point, Wendy, on quality of representation. It's so important. Storytelling has such an impact. I think just to kind of speak on Australia while things are changing, I'd say, broadly speaking, I do see similar disparities still being perpetuated, where there are gaps in the types of influencers that are seen to be able to deliver that credibility in specific categories. In kind of contrast to the diverse audiences who could be interested in their products. Just a couple of examples. Male influencers are usually chosen for the automotive category, but on the other hand, female influencers are often selected for the beauty category. Yet around 92% say they want better diversity reflected in beauty advertising. So something that really kind of sings out is that there is that representation that is required and being called on demand from those consumers. I think a key driver that sometimes isn't talked about that's crucial to this is that there is potentially a supply issue. In Australia, there's around 75% of social influencers that are female, and lifestyle and beauty have the highest distribution of influencers in Australia as well. This is improving a little bit on previous years, but it is quite a disparity when we think about the even split of user base between genders on social. So when we partner this with the fact that the cost of social influence is increasing and social engagement is decreasing, that effect is starting to wear off. So we are quite empowered here, though, starting to see some sort of strides in particular areas. Personally, from my experience, seeing demand for female influencers to empower financial decisions, just an example, and growing popularity of auto influencers like the female influencer Supercar Blondie. But I definitely hope to continue seeing this more.
The second question for Eileen. From the Philippines, what do you think are some of the biggest opportunities to take changes and be more inclusive?
I think to a certain extent, I would echo what they shared, right? There are certain categories where there's gender bias, and you touched on it, right? Automotive, financial, in insurance, investments, there seems to be a bias towards males being the experts in that arena. And Philippines, we have a macho culture. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done content-wise as well. There are somehow few experts that we hear. And maybe as people in the media industry, we need to build expertise as well or shed light on existing experts and, let their voices be heard.
Yeah. I'm conscious of time. I think we have about 1 to 2 minutes left. I'm looking at so I think I'm going to wrap up just so that we are all punctual. Thank you very much to all panelists for joining us. Arthur, who co-wrote the paper, and of course, Eileen, Rach, Wendy, and Claire, who is now not in your screen, for sharing a little bit more about their perspectives on inclusivity and some of, I think, the work that we have a lot to do in our region to make sure that we're advancing on some of these areas. I think we can only do better by being more inclusive, and hopefully today we managed to show you why we should start to think inclusive and also share with you practical ways in which we can start to make step change in your respective organizations and brands. So with that, we will wrap up our Loop Live session for today. Thank you for joining us in this very special hybrid session, and we look forward to seeing you in the next Loop Live, which should come to you in about 3 to 4 weeks. Cheers, everyone.